Lady Adelaide Fenwick did not lower her eyes. She stood in the centre of the Ashcombe ballroom, and Lady Prudence took the little pencil that hung from her wrist and drew it straight through Adelaide's name on the dance card. She did it slowly. She did it so the two young debutantes at her elbow would see. And she said, loud enough for the nearest dozen guests, that the widow was too sharp by half to be anyone's wife twice. Adelaide only smiled. She finished the sentence she had been saying about the failing corn law, finished it evenly, as if a knife had not just gone through her name. Then it got worse. The new Viscount Fenwick, her late husband's nephew, a soft young man with a wet mouth, stood up before 90 guests and announced that her jointure would stay in more prudent hands. Until, he said, she learned a softer temper. And the ballroom laughed. It laughed like one animal. Across the room, the Duke of Ravenscar set down his glass. He crossed the whole floor. He bent to her, and he said 3 words no one else could hear. If you have ever been called too much by people who were never enough, this story is for you. I'm the voice you're going to spend the next hour with. And before we go on, do me one small thing. Tap subscribe, because stories like this one are what we do here. And leave a comment telling me the city you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far a sharp woman's story can travel. Now, let me take you back, and let me tell it properly, from the beginning. Adelaide Fenwick grew up the cleverest person in every room she was ever put in. And she was taught, very early, that this was a defect. She could read Latin at 7. She could add a column of figures in her head faster than her father's steward could do it on paper. When men at her father's table argued about the price of wheat, or the war, or the new canals, she would listen, and then she would say the one thing that turned the whole argument over. And the room would go quiet. Not the good quiet, the other one. Her mother used to press 2 fingers to Adelaide's wrist under the table. A small pressure. It meant, be less. It meant, they don't like it. Adelaide learned what the pressure meant. She simply could not make herself obey it. So they married her off. That was the cure they chose. At 19, she was given to Viscount Fenwick, a man 20 years older, who wanted a decorative wife and got Adelaide instead. It did not go well. He drank. In the first year, she thought she could steady him. By the third, she knew better. He resented her the way a slow man resents a fast one. When she was right, and she was often right, he took it as an insult he could not answer. So he answered it other ways. There was a night. She remembered it in pieces, the way you remember the worst nights. They had been playing chess. She was winning. She was always winning, and she had learned to lose to him on purpose, but that night she was tired, and she forgot to lose. He saw the board turning against him, and he stood up and swept the whole set off the table with the back of his hand. The pieces went everywhere. Ivory against the floorboards, that small, dreadful sound. He went to bed. She got down on her knees in her good dress and gathered them up, one by one in the dark. She found the white queen under the settee. It had struck the fender and chipped, a small, clean bite taken out of the crown. She held it in her palm, and she did not put it back in the box with the others. She kept it. She has kept it ever since. Fenwick died the next winter. Debts, mostly, and a bad heart, and the drink. He left her almost nothing. He left her a great deal of nothing, in fact, because the title and the money went sideways to his nephew Cassius, and all that came to Adelaide was what the law forced into her hands. A dower house called Larkfield, down in Somerset, and £750 a year. Her jointure, the widow's portion. It was not much, but it was hers. And Larkfield, that low stone house with the larches behind it and the morning room that caught the sun, that was the first thing in her whole life that had ever been only hers. She could sit in it and be as clever as she liked, and no one pressed her wrist. Now, I want you to understand who she was in that house, because it matters. She was not bitter. That's the thing that Tom never understood about her. A woman treated as Adelaide had been treated has every right to go hard and cruel, and she did not. She tutored the vicar's 2 daughters in Latin, for nothing, because their father could not pay a governess, and the girls were bright, and Adelaide could not stand to watch a bright girl go untaught. She never once repeated a cruelty. She heard 100 of them a season, and she filed them away, and she never used them. She had a temper made entirely of accuracy. She only ever said true things. That was the whole of her crime. And she turned the chipped queen over in her fingers when she thought. It was a habit by now. When a problem sat in front of her, she would take that little broken piece of ivory out of her pocket and roll it between finger and thumb, round and round, the smooth part and the rough bitten part, and somehow it helped her think. She did not examine why. Some things you don't examine. That was the woman. Clever, decent, alone, and safe. And then they came for the one thing she had. It began with Cassius. He came down to Larkfield in November, in a new carriage, with a new man of business, and he sat in her morning room and would not meet her eye. He told her there was a difficulty with the jointure. He used that word, difficulty, the way men use it when they mean a decision they've already made. The estate's affairs were tangled, he said. It would be prudent, he said, to hold her $750 a year in trust, just for a while, just until things were more settled. Adelaide looked at him. She let the silence run a beat too long, the way she knew how to do. "Until my temper improves," she said. "You may as well say it plainly, Cassius. It's what you mean." He flushed. He did not deny it. He gathered his gloves and his new man of business, and he left, and her income left with him. And she sat in the morning room with the light going grey, and turned the chipped queen over and over, and thought. She was not frightened yet. She should have been, but she had never in her life met a problem she could not outthink, and she did not yet know that this one was not a problem of thinking. It was a problem of who is allowed to win. She went up to London for the season because she had to. Larkfield had a mortgage on it, an old one, from Fenwick's debts, and the interest had to be paid, and with her jointure frozen, she needed to understand exactly how bad things were. That meant seeing lawyers. It also meant, God help her, going into society, because that was where money and information both lived, and a widow could not simply refuse to appear without the whole ton deciding she'd gone mad, or poor, which to them was the same word. So she went, and she sat at the card tables, which she was permitted to do as a widow, and she could not, would not, play stupid. There was an evening at Lady Sefton's, 3 men at the table with her, and one of them a fat member of Parliament named Harcourt, who had opinions about the Corn Laws and no facts underneath them. He held forth. He said the tariffs kept the country strong. He said cheap foreign wheat would ruin the honest English farmer. He said it the way such men say things, as if saying it loudly made it true. Adelaide put down a card, and then, mildly, she took his whole argument apart. She did it in 4 sentences. She pointed out that the tariff did not protect the farmer, it protected the landlord, and that the two were not the same man. She named the price of a loaf in Manchester that winter. She named what it had been 5 years before. She asked him gently who exactly he thought was paying the difference, and whether he had ever met one of them. Harcourt went purple. He had no answer. There was no answer, that was the trouble. She was simply right, and a woman being simply right in front of him was more than he could bear. He said something about clever women and their clever tongues. He said it was a wonder she'd been married at all, and around the table the others smiled. Not at him, at her, as if she were the thing out of place. That was the night the phrase started. She heard it later, passed hand to hand like a coin, too sharp to wed again. That was Lady Fenwick, too sharp to wed again. She went home to her rented rooms, and she was sorting her late husband's papers, which she still had not finished doing. Boxes of them, years of a dead man's correspondence. And among the dunning notices and the wine merchant's bills, she found a letter she did not recognize. It was sealed with a crest she half knew, a raven and a coronet. She turned it over. The paper was good and old and yellowed at the folds. She almost broke the seal. And then she saw it was addressed to Fenwick, years back, and she thought, some steward's business. years stale. Another dunning notice, probably, another creditor from her husband's ruinous life, and she had 100 of those and no wish to read the 101st. She set it aside, unread, on the corner of the writing desk. A throwaway thing. She would come back to it. She did not come back to it. Keep that letter in your mind. She won't, for a while, but you should. Now let me bring in the Duke, because he was in London too, and he was bored in a way that had started to frighten him. Marcus Thorne, Duke of Ravenscar. 38, a widower, and rich in the way that stops meaning anything. He had buried his wife 4 years before. It had been a kind marriage, a gentle one, arranged and then grown mild and fond, and when she died, something in him had simply sat down and not got up. What he had left mostly was flattery. Everywhere he went, people arranged their faces for him. Mothers pushed daughters at him like cards off a deck. Men agreed with everything he said before he'd finished saying it. He had not been genuinely surprised by another human being in longer than he could remember, and he had begun to suspect that this smooth, agreeable nothing was simply what the rest of his life was going to be. Then he watched a widow in a grey silk gown take Harcourt apart at a card table. He had been standing across the room, not really listening, and then he was listening, and then he was watching the way you watch a thing you didn't know still existed. She never raised her voice. She never smiled cruelly. She just told the truth, cleanly, and let it land, and did not care in the least that the room disapproved. He saw her not care. That was the part that caught him. He had spent 4 years surrounded by people who did nothing but care what the room thought. And here was a woman who had clearly decided long ago that the room could go hang. He made inquiries. Lady Fenwick, they told him, with a little curl of the lip. The sharp one. The widow. Too clever, they said, as if warning him. He crossed to her the next time they were under the same roof. It was at a musical evening, a dreadful one, and she was standing a little apart, and he came up to her with all the certainty of 38 years of being a duke. He expected it to be easy. It was always easy. Lady Fenwick, he said, I watched you dismantle a member of Parliament. I confess I enjoyed it more than the music. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she'd looked at Cassius, that steady, measuring look that most people could not hold. You enjoyed it, she said, because it cost you nothing. It cost me my reputation. Those are different seats at the same theatre, Your Grace. And she inclined her head, exactly the correct amount, and she walked away from him. She walked away. From the Duke of Ravenscar. He stood there with his charming opening still warm in his mouth and nowhere to put it. And he laughed, quietly to himself, in the middle of that terrible music. For the first time in 4 years he was interested. He should have left it there, and he knew even then he wasn't going to. Now we come to the ball, the Ashcombe ball. You've already seen the end of it, at the very start. But I didn't tell you everything, and it's time you had it whole. Lady Prudence Ashcombe gave the grandest ball of the season, and she gave it for one reason. Her daughter Cassandra was out that year. Cassandra was the diamond, the approved one, beautiful and biddable and blank, a girl who had never in her life said a thing that hadn't been said to her first. Lady Prudence intended her to be the next Duchess of Ravenscar. She had, in fact, already decided it, the way she decided everything, as a matter of arrangement rather than hope. And the Duke of Ravenscar had accepted the invitation. So Lady Prudence was in a very good humour, right up until she saw who else her people had let through the door. Adelaide had not wanted to come, but a lawyer she needed to speak with would be there, and so she came, in the grey silk again, because she could no longer afford new, and she stood at the edge of the room and tried to be small, which was the one thing on earth she could not do. Lady Prudence found her within the hour. She came sweeping over with 2 debutantes in tow, 2 little pupils to be instructed, and she took up Adelaide's dance card, the card every lady wore at her wrist, and she found Adelaide's name upon the list of guests, and she drew her pencil through it. Slow, deliberate, so the girls would learn. Too sharp by half, she said, to be anyone's wife twice. And she smiled, and the girls tittered because they had been taught to. And here is what Adelaide did. She was in the middle of a sentence, actually, to an elderly gentleman beside her, a sentence about the very corn law that had ruined her at Lady Sefton's, and she did not stop it. She finished the sentence, evenly, as if her name were not being struck out an arm's length from her face. That is a kind of courage almost no one has, and the ton read it as insolence, which tells you everything about the ton. Then Cassius saw his chance. He had been drinking. He was a coward, and drink made him brave, which is the worst combination there is. He was standing near the musicians with a knot of young men, and he saw his aunt by marriage humiliated and unbowed, and he could not stand that she was unbowed. So he raised his voice. He raised it over the room, the way you'd propose a toast. He said, the jointure, the widow's little income, would stay in more prudent hands. Until, he said, she learned a softer temper. And he smirked at his own wit, and he waited. And the ballroom laughed. 90 people. It went through the room like wind through wheat, that laugh. And it was aimed at one woman standing alone in a grey dress. And it was the cruelest sound because it was so easy. It cost them nothing. She had said it herself, hadn't she? Different seats at the same theatre. I want you to sit in that moment with her for a second, because this is the bottom of it. This is as low as she goes. Her name struck out, her income mocked, her whole worth measured and dismissed in public by 2 people not fit to sharpen her pen, and 90 more laughing along because it was the thing to do. She had left something on a side table by the wall. Earlier, standing there alone, she had taken the chipped white queen out of her pocket and set it down while she opened her fan, and forgotten it. It sat there now, on the marble, the little broken piece of ivory, catching the candlelight. Small, overlooked, chipped, and still a queen. Marcus Thorne saw it. He'd been watching her all evening. He saw her set it down, and he'd wondered at it, a chess piece of all things, in a lady's pocket. And now he saw the whole room laugh at her, and he saw her keep her chin up while it did, and something in him that had been sitting down for 4 years stood back up. He set down his glass. Every eye had been on Adelaide, but eyes have a way of following a duke, and so, as he began to move, the room began to turn. He crossed the floor. The whole floor, the entire length of that ballroom, slow and unhurried, past Lady Prudence, who arranged her face into welcome, past Cassandra waiting to be chosen, past Cassius, whose smirk began to fail him. Marcus did not stop at any of them. He went to the side table. He picked up the small chipped queen, and he weighed it in his fingers a moment, and then he carried it to Adelaide, and he took her hand, there, in front of 90 people, and he set the broken ivory queen into her palm and closed her fingers over it. The music had stopped. Nobody had told it to. They call you too sharp to match, he said, and his voice was not loud, but the room had gone so silent that it carried to the walls. Then match me. And he left it there. Chessboard or altar. He did not say which. He let the 2 meanings hang in the air together, the game and the marriage, the board and the ring, and he did not pick one, and the whole ton stood frozen trying to work out which thing a duke had just offered a disgraced widow in front of the entire world. That is where the card cut, at the start. Now you know the words. Adelaide stood with the broken queen in her fist and the Duke of Ravenscar in front of her, and 90 faces waiting to see her fall apart, or blush, or curtsy, or weep with gratitude at being rescued. She did none of it. She opened her hand and looked at the queen. Then she looked up at him, and she said, in a voice as clear and cool as his own, "You should be careful what you offer across a crowded room, Your Grace. Someone might make you keep it." And she closed her fingers again, and she walked out of the Ashcombe ball with her head up and the little chipped queen held tight, and she left him standing there. The room breathed out all at once, and the talk began before she'd even reached the door. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her rented rooms with a single candle, and she was furious. And under the fury, she was frightened, because she understood exactly what he had done to her. He had made her the most talked-about woman in London. A duke had crossed a ballroom for her. Half the ton would say he was slumming, amusing himself with the clever widow before he did his duty and married the diamond. The other half would say she had schemed for it somehow, sharp-tongued fortune huntress that she was. Either way, she was now a spectacle, and she had been so careful, all her life, never to be a spectacle. And under the fear was one more thing, smaller, that she refused to look at directly. When he had closed her fingers over the Queen, his hand had been warm and steady, and he had not been laughing at her. Nobody had looked at her without laughing in a very long time. She turned the Queen over in her fingers, round and round, and she made herself stop thinking about his hand. The morning brought the lawyer she'd been trying to reach at the ball, and the lawyer brought the number. Larkfield's mortgage, the old debt of Fenwick's, secured against her one house. £3,800, principal and arrears together, and the note called due at Lady Day, the 25th of March. She had it there, in the man's dry, careful voice. Pay £3,800 by Lady Day, or the house was forfeit. Her house. The larches and the morning room, and the one place on earth that was hers. And her jointure, the £750 a year that might, given years, have chipped away at such a sum, was frozen in Cassius's prudent hands. She understood then that she had not been given a problem of thinking. She could think from now until Lady Day, and she would not think £3,800 into her purse. This was a problem of who is allowed to win, and the answer the world had decided on was, not you. That afternoon a card came from Ravenscar Court, stiff, engraved, correct. The Duke of Ravenscar requested the pleasure of Lady Fenwick at chess. A series of games, it said, at her convenience, before whatever company she wished, on whatever terms she chose to set. She sat with the card a long time. She knew what he was doing. He was making a public thing of it, so that all of London would watch the Duke and the sharp widow play, and she would be a spectacle whether she agreed or not. And she knew, too, that a woman who a Duke found interesting was a woman with a little power, for as long as it lasted, and that she was in no position to throw any scrap of power away, not with Lady Day coming. But she would not be rescued. She wrote that word down on a piece of paper and underlined it. She would not be some great man's charity, the widow he lifted out of the gutter to prove his own generosity. She had watched her whole life what happened to women who were saved. They spent the rest of their days being grateful, which is another word for small. So she wrote back. She accepted. But she set the terms herself, in her own sharp hand. She would play him, she wrote. A chess match. Only that, and nothing implied by it. No promises given, and none understood. She would sit across a board from him, and she would try, with everything she had, to beat him. And when he lost, she wrote, and she wrote when, and not if, he was to bear it in front of whatever audience he'd assembled, and call it what it was. She sent it before she could think better of it. Then she took out the chipped Queen, and turned it over and over, and wondered what on earth she thought she was doing. Ravenscar Court, when she came to it, was everything she'd braced for. Marble and silence and footmen like statues. He had assembled a small company, as she'd known he would, a dozen people in a long salon, and among them his younger sister, Lady Honoria, who watched Adelaide come in with frank, open curiosity, and none of the usual sneer, which Adelaide noted and did not trust. The board was set on a low table between two chairs. Good pieces, a full set, ivory and ebony, complete, every man present and correct. She thought of her own broken set, the one in the box at Larkfield with the Queen missing from it, and she said nothing. They played. And here is the thing about Adelaide Fenwick at a chessboard. She did not know how to lose on purpose anymore. She had unlearned it the night her husband swept the pieces to the floor. So she did not try to lose, and she did not try to be charming, and she did not once let him win a point to smooth his pride. She simply played, the way she did everything, with the whole of her mind, and she took him apart. It was not a slaughter. He was good. He was genuinely good, better than anyone she'd played in years, and for a while the game was beautiful and even and hard, and she felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember, which was the pure, clean pleasure of a mind meeting hers and not flinching. He met her. Move for move, he met her. And then, in the middle game, she saw the line. 6 moves out, a small, quiet sacrifice that opened a door he hadn't shut. and she took the door, and 11 moves later she laid his king down. The salon was very quiet. This was the moment, she thought. This was where the great man's face closes, where the charm goes cold, where she learns what he's really made of, the way she'd learned what Fenwick was made of over a board, just like this one. Marcus Thorne looked at the board, he looked at the fallen king, and he threw back his head and he laughed. Not a duke's laugh, not the polished sound great men make, a real one, surprised out of him, loud and delighted, the laugh of a man who had just been beaten cleanly and could not remember the last time it had happened, and found that he loved it. His whole face changed when he laughed like that. The weariness went out of it. For just a moment, he did not look like the Duke of Ravenscar at all. He looked like a man. "Again," he said, still laughing, already resetting the pieces. "God, again! Do you know how long it's been since anyone let me lose?" "I didn't let you," she said. "No," he said, and looked at her, and the laugh went quiet, but the warmth of it stayed. "No, you didn't. That's rather the point." They played 4 games that afternoon. She won 3, and something moved between them across that board, one small degree, the first, though neither of them named it. She came back. Of course, she came back. She told herself it was strategy, that a woman with a duke's interest had a shield the Ton could not easily break, that she needed every shield she had with Lady Day bearing down. And that was true, but it was not the whole truth, and she knew it. And she turned the chipped queen over in her fingers on the carriage ride home, and would not look at the rest of the truth straight on. Over the next weeks, she learned things about him she had not meant to learn. She learned that he watched her too closely. One afternoon she had come without eating, because she never could eat when she was anxious, and Lady Day made her anxious every waking hour now. And somewhere in the second game, a footman appeared at her elbow with a small plate. Bread, cold chicken, a little fruit. She had not asked. She looked up, and Marcus was studying the board and would not meet her eye. And she understood that he had noticed, days ago maybe, that she did not eat when she was frightened, and had simply and quietly seen to it, without making her thank him for it. She ate. She did not comment. But something in her chest that had been clenched for years loosened by a single notch, and that frightened her more than Cassius ever had. And she learned his own wound, because a sharp woman sees everything. There was a drawer in the salon's writing desk that he touched sometimes without knowing he did it, resting his hand on it the way you rest a hand on a grave. One afternoon it stood open a crack, and she saw inside a bundle of letters, tied with faded ribbon, the ink gone brown. His late wife's letters, she understood at once, and the seals were unbroken. He had never opened them. 4 years, and he had kept them, and never once been able to read them. She said nothing about that either. But she looked at him differently after. This man everyone thought had everything, who could not open a drawer. There came an afternoon when he asked her about the Queen. She had it out on the table beside the board, without thinking, the little chipped white Queen, and he had seen her take it out a dozen times by then and had never asked. And this day he did. He nodded at it. "You carry a broken piece to a game with a full set," he said. "I've wanted to ask for weeks." She almost gave him a sharp answer. It was her reflex, the sharp answer, the thing she reached for when someone got too close. But she was tired, and the afternoon was gold through the tall windows, and he had asked it gently, so she told him the truth instead. "It's from my marriage," she said. She turned it in her fingers. "The only piece I kept. My husband broke the set one night, swept it off the table because I was winning, and he couldn't bear it. I gathered them up off the floor in the dark, and this one was chipped, and I kept it." She set it upright on the marble, the small, bitten crown catching the light. "A broken thing," she said, "that still rules the board." She had not meant to say that last part aloud, it had simply come out. Marcus did not laugh, and he did not pity her, and he did not say any of the soft, useless things people say. He looked at the Queen for a long moment, and then he looked at her, and she saw that he had understood far more than she'd offered. He had understood the whole of it, the marriage and the fear and the armor, all of it, in 6 words about a chess piece. "Yes," he said quietly, It does. And he did not touch it, and he did not touch her. But the air between them had changed, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. He reset the board instead. It was the only safe thing to do. That evening his sister Honoria caught Adelaide's sleeve as she was leaving. "You should know," Honoria said low. "My brother has not been himself since his wife died. And these last weeks he has been more himself than I've seen him in years." She said it kindly. She said it as a gift. But Adelaide heard the weight underneath it, the expectation, the whole family's hope resting suddenly on the shoulders of the sharp widow, and she carried that weight home in the dark carriage along with everything else. Because here is what the whole world had decided about the two of them, and here is where the danger truly lay. All of London now assumed Adelaide Fenwick was playing the longest game of her life, that every move across that board was a move toward the coronet, that the sharp widow, denied a husband by her tongue, had found a duke foolish enough to be charmed and meant to reel him in. And you know, because you have been with her from the start, that it was the exact opposite. She was not reeling him in. She was holding him at arm's length with both hands. She was terrified, not of losing him, but of the way her chest loosened one notch every time he quietly did a kind thing and asked for no thanks. She had built her whole self out of never once lowering the armor, and here was a man who had seen the armor and then seen through it, and that was the one attack she had no defense against. So the Tun watched a scheming widow, and the truth was a frightened woman holding love away from her own body with all her strength, because she had learned, over a broken chess set on a dark floor, exactly what it cost to let a man that close. It came to a head in the salon, in front of everyone, and it came to a head because Adelaide made it. Someone had said something. One of the company, a smiling woman, had made a remark, light as anything, about how good His Grace was to take up the widow's cause, how like him to lift a lady out of her difficulties. Everyone smiled. It was the story they'd all agreed on, the great man and his charity. And Adelaide put down the piece in her hand and stood up. She was tired of being a cause. She was tired of being rescued in the imaginations of people who would never rescue anyone. So she did not wait to be defined. She defined herself out loud, before Honoria and the smiling company and Marcus, watching her from across the board with something careful in his face. "Let me be very clear," she said, and her voice was steady and it carried. "Since the room seems to require it, I will marry no man to be saved, not the Duke, not anyone. I have a house I may lose, and a name they've already taken, and I will keep neither by handing myself to a man as the price of the rescue." She looked around at them, everyone. "But I will keep playing His Grace. I will sit at this board with him until one of us cannot answer the other. That is my choice, not his, mine. And I'll thank this room to stop writing me a happy ending I did not ask for." The silence after was total. And Marcus Thorne, across the board, looked at her standing there with her chin up, staking her own dignity on the game continuing, choosing it aloud in front of witnesses, refusing to be anyone's project. And he understood that she had just done the bravest and most dangerous thing he had ever watched a person do. She had made herself the author, not him, her. He rose, slowly, to his feet. The whole room waited to see what a duke would do, so publicly refused and so publicly claimed at once. And on the far side of the room, unseen by both of them, in a bureau that had come down from Larkfield in a box of old papers, Adelaide still had not finished sorting, the yellowed letter with the raven crest sat sealed and waiting. The letter she had glanced at and set aside as some steward's business, years stale. It sat there, patient, with her name inside it, and his family's name beside it, and the whole truth folded up small. She did not know yet what she had brought into that house. He crossed to her instead of speaking. That surprised the room. A duke so publicly refused, and he only walked the length of the floor and stopped to pace away, close enough that no one else could catch the words. "You've made yourself the author," he said. "Good. I never wanted to write you. I only wanted to be on the same page." She held his eyes. Then play badly enough to lose sometimes, your grace. Authors hate a rigged ending." And he laughed. Not the ducal laugh, the one kept for drawing rooms. The real one, low and caught off guard, the laugh of a man who had forgotten he owned it. Honoria heard it from the settee and went still. 4 years since that sound had lived in the house. She looked at Adelaide with frank wonder, and Adelaide pretended not to see it, and the game went on. That was the spring of it. The weeks after ran like that. She came to Ravenscar Court, and they played, and the chipped white queen sat on the table beside the board, where she set it each time, out of her pocket, like a witness she trusted more than the company. But the ton does not sit still, while a widow it has buried climbs back out of the grave. Lady Prudence Ashcombe went to work. She was too clever to strike again in the open. She struck in the soft places instead. A word at the modistes, a word at the opera. The Duke, poor man, so lonely since the Duchess passed, and clever women do prey on lonely men, don't they? Cassandra, placed always in his eye-line, biddable and bright and quiet. Everything Adelaide was not. And the whisper underneath it all, the old one, resurrected and dressed fresh, that Lady Fenwick's tongue had driven one husband to the bottle and the grave, and would drive a duke the same way if the family let her near. Adelaide heard it come back. She always heard it. She turned the chipped queen in her fingers and said nothing, and the mortgage clock ran under everything. £3,800, due at Lady Day, the 25th of March. Cassius would not service the note. He said so to her face in her own salon, with the frozen sweetness of a man who has learned that money is a leash. "The family cannot be seen throwing good coin after a house you cannot keep," he said. "Sell Larkfield, take rooms in Bath. A widow of your years does not need so much room to be sharp in." £750 a year he held from her still, her own jointure frozen in his hands until she learned a softer temper. She could have paid the note twice over across the years he'd held it. He knew that. That was the cruelty of it. He had built her a cage out of her own money and told the world she'd built it herself. Into that came Mr. Gideon Vaughan. He was not a bad man. That was the trouble with him. He was a wealthy member for a northern seat, a widower himself, comfortable and mild, and he came to Larkfield with his hat in his hands and an offer that was entirely kind. He would settle the note. He would restore her rooms in town. He asked for nothing but her hand and a quieter life. "You needn't sparkle for me, Lady Fenwick," he said, and he meant it as tenderness. "I am too old to be dazzled, and too settled to be threatened. You could put the wit down, rest it. Not everyone requires you to be at the top of your form." And God help her, for one long afternoon it was tempting. Not the money, the rest. To be somewhere she did not have to be armed. To set the sword down and let it rust and be, for once, simply comfortable. She turned the chipped queen over in her pocket while he talked. "You are very kind, Mr. Vaughan," she said at last, "and that is the whole of the problem. You'd love me by making me smaller, a little at a time, so gently I might not notice till there was nothing left to notice. I've been made smaller before. I'd rather lose the house." He took it well. That was the decent thing in him. He bowed, and he did not argue, and he left the door open, the way patient men do, and Adelaide stood at her window and watched his carriage go, and did not feel relief. She felt afraid, because the safe thing had been in the room, and she had sent it away, and the only thing left in her chest was the reckless want she would not name. Then Marcus overstepped. They were at the board. She had let something show, a tightness around the eyes when she thought of Lady Day, and he read it the way he read the game, 3 moves ahead. "Let me pay it," he said, simply, like moving a pawn. "The Larkfield note. It's nothing to me and everything to you. Say the word and it's done tonight, and you keep your house and we go on playing." The temperature in the room dropped. She set the piece down very carefully. "And there it is," she said. "You've been so patient, Your Grace. Nearly, I believed you'd understood. But you're still a duke, and a duke thinks the answer to any lock is his purse. Adelaide, if you pay it, I am kept. Do you see? Then I am exactly what your Lady Prudence says I am. the clever widow who got a rich man to open his coffers. Every whisper true. You would not be saving Larkfield. You'd be handing them the proof. She stood. You don't get to buy me out of the corner, even to be kind, especially to be kind. He'd risen too. For a moment, the Duke in him wanted to command it. She saw that, saw rank rise up behind his eyes like a tide, and then he mastered it, and what was left was only a man who had reached for her the only way he knew and been told the way was wrong. Then how? He said quiet. Tell me how, and I'll do it that way instead. I don't know yet, she said, but not like a thing you win. I've been won before, Marcus. There's a chess set at the bottom of my memory, swept off a table by a man who married me for the estate and hated me for the mind. I will not be swept again, not even into softer hands. The degree slipped backward that night. She felt it go. She went home to Larkfield and could not sleep, and toward dawn, restless and low, she went to the bureau to finish the sorting she'd been avoiding for months. The old papers from the estate, her late husband's leavings, boxes of it, come down with her, unlooked at. And there, near the bottom, was the yellowed letter with the raven crest. She'd seen it before, glanced at it, a year ago, more, and set it aside. Some steward's business, she'd thought. A dunning notice, years stale. The Ravenscar seal had meant nothing to her then. It meant a great deal now. She broke it. It was in the hand of a Mr. Crenshaw, the Ravenscar family's man of business, dead these several years, writing to her late husband in a season long gone. And it was not a dunning notice. It was an accounting, a cold, clerkish, thorough accounting of a thing that had been done. Crenshaw had called in Viscount Fenwick's loans, all of them, at once, when they might have been carried. Not for the debt itself, to break him, because the Fenwick land sat athwart a drainage interest the Ravenscar estate had wanted quietly bought, and a ruined man sells cheap, and a drunk one signs anything. And there, in the same clerkish hand, the second thing, the instruction to cede a whisper, to let it be known, in the right ears, that Lady Fenwick's tongue and her cleverness had driven her husband to drink and to ruin, so that when the estate collapsed, the blame would land on the sharp wife and not on the ledger that had done it. They had built the whisper. The Ravenscar house had built the very whisper that had followed her for years. Too sharp to wed. Too sharp, they said, so no one would look at the debt and ask who had really called it in. The name that was courting her had manufactured the ruin that damned her. She sat with the letter in the grey light and did not weep. She was past weeping. She thought of him saying, "Let me pay it," and it turned to ash in her memory. Of course he would pay it. It was his family's debt to begin with. He would be closing his own ledger and calling it a gift. She did not think he knew. Even then, even in the worst of it, she did not think Marcus knew. But it did not matter whether he knew. The house that had broken her could not be the house that saved her. To take his hand now would be to forgive, with her body and her name, a thing that had never even been confessed. She went to Ravenscar Court that same afternoon, and she brought the letter, and she did not sit down. "Read it," she said, and put it in his hands. She watched his face as he read. She had loved that face, she understood now, watching it, and she watched it go white to the lips, and then still. The stillness of a man who has been struck somewhere that does not show. "Crenshaw," he said. His voice had gone to nothing. "This is Crenshaw's hand. Your family's man." He stopped, started again. "I was a boy, or nearly. This is dated, Adelaide. I did not know this. I swear to you before God I did not know one word of this." "I believe you," she said, and saw that surprise him, that she'd grant it. "I do believe you, Marcus. You didn't do it, but you can't undo it either. It's your ledger. Your land was drained with the money that broke my husband and salted my name. You can be innocent, and it's still your house, standing on the ground it took. Both those things are true at once. You taught me the board's honest that way. Everything counts, even the moves you didn't make. Tell me what to do." He was on his feet. "Anything, name it." "There's nothing to do." She was very calm, and it frightened her. How calm. That's what you never learned. Some corners your purse can't reach, and your rank can't command. You can only lose. And I came to tell you I'm going home to Larkfield to lose it properly. Alone, on my own feet, not bought out of the fire by the family that lit it. She reached into her pocket then and took out the chipped white queen. She had carried it through every one of these rooms. She set it down on the table beside the board where she always set it, and this time she did not pick it up again. That stayed in my pocket 20 years, she said. The broken thing that still rules the board. I thought it was armor. I think now it was just something to hold on to so my hands weren't empty. You keep it. You'll understand it better than most. A ruling piece with a piece chipped out of it. That's this whole house, Your Grace. Yours and mine both. And she walked away from it, from the Queen and the board, and him standing behind it, with the letter in one hand and the little broken piece in his sight, and she did not look back, because looking back was a luxury a woman with a house to lose could not afford. Lady Day was 9 days off. The season's great charity gala fell 4 days before it. 90 families of the ton, or near enough the same 90 who had watched her name struck from a card, gathered in a candle-lit gallery hung with the year's subscriptions and the year's spite. Adelaide had not meant to go. Honoria came to Larkfield herself and would not leave without her. "You will come," Honoria said, "because my brother has asked one thing of me in 4 years, and it is that you be in that room. I don't know what he means to do. I know he hasn't slept. Come and see, Adelaide. If it's wrong, you may hate us all forever, and I'll help you do it. But come and see." So she came. In grey silk, chin up, the way she'd taught 2 debutantes to hold themselves without knowing she was teaching them. Lady Prudence saw her enter, and her fan snapped open like a blade. Cassandra beside her, pale and lovely and looking, Adelaide thought, tired to her bones of being lovely on command. Cassius by the card-room, fat with borrowed importance, her £750 a year keeping him in that good coat. And the Duke of Ravenscar, at the head of the gallery, waiting. He did not come to her. He stepped up instead onto the low dais, meant for the evening's patrons, and he asked for the room. And because he was who he was, the room gave itself to him, curious, feral, hoping for blood. "You know me," he said. "You flattered me for years. Let me give you something truer than flattery in return. I have a letter." He held it up, the yellowed page, the raven crest. "It is in the hand of Mr. Crenshaw, who managed my family's affairs when I was too young to manage them myself, and I am going to read it to you, all of it, because a woman in this room has carried the weight of a lie for years, and it is my family's lie, and I would rather burn my own name clean than let her carry it one night longer." And he read it, every clerkish, damning line, the loans called in to break a man, the land taken cheap from the ruin, and then the whisper, ordered up like linen, "Let it be known that the wife's sharp tongue drove him down, so no one counts the coin." He read the instruction to slander her aloud, in that gallery, to the very people who had passed the slander mouth to mouth for years, and he watched them understand what they had been used to do. The silence was not the ball's silence. That had been a room enjoying a woman's fall. This was a room discovering it had been the weapon. Lady Prudence's fan had stopped. It hung open in her hand, useless. "So," Marcus said, and folded the letter. "The widow you call too sharp to wed was too sharp to be robbed quietly, that is all. Her cleverness was never the defect. It was the thing my family's man could not account for and chose to bury. I'll not have it buried." He turned, and his eyes found Cassius by the card-room. "And you, Viscount, you've held a lawful jointure from a widow 4 years against every statute I've had read. 750 a year, frozen, to keep her small. There's a magistrate at the door. I invited myself. You'll release it tonight, under his eye and his pen, or you'll answer for it under his warrant. Choose." Cassius's mouth worked. No sound came out of it. The room had turned to look at him, and there was no laugh in it this time. Then Marcus looked at her, across the whole floor, the same floor. Adelaide Fenwick, he said, and the gallery held its breath as one animal. I could clear your name and stop there, and it would be only justice, and you'd owe me nothing, and that would be right. But I'm a greedy man, and I'll ask for more, in front of all of them, where I once asked wrong. I said, match me once, and I let the pun sit open, because I hadn't the courage to say which I meant. Here's the courage. I mean both. I've meant both since the first game you won. So, not to be saved, never to be saved. You've a house free and clear as of tonight, and a name cleaner than mine. Nothing forces your hand. He paused. The board's yours. It's your move. What do you say to a man who's finally learned to lose? 90 faces turned to her. She let them wait. She had learned that from him, over the board, the value of the pause. And then she smiled, the smile that had been called too sharp by half, and she gave it to the whole room like a gift they didn't deserve and would remember anyway. I say you've left your queen exposed, your grace, she said, and her voice carried the length of the gallery, clear as a struck glass. Reading that letter, naming your own family's crime in your own house's hall, that's a piece most men would sooner die than sacrifice. You put your pride on the board and gave it up to clear a widow's name. She tilted her head. It's the worst defended, most reckless, most beautiful move I've ever watched a player make, and I've beaten you 3 games in 4, so I know exactly what it cost you. Then it's checkmate, he said. In my favor for once, say so. No, she said, and the room flinched, and she let it flinch, and then she finished it. It's not checkmate. Checkmate ends the game. I've no intention of ending it. I want a man I can play the rest of my life and never once run out of answers to. She stepped forward, 1 step, onto the empty floor between them, alone in the middle of the 90. So no, I won't be saved, and no, this is not a rescue. It's the next game. Yes, Marcus. To both your meanings, yes. Set the board. The gallery broke. Not into applause first, into breath. 90 people breathing out at once. And then, from somewhere near the back, from one of the 2 debutantes who had watched her name struck from a card a lifetime of weeks ago, a single pair of hands began to clap, young and defiant, and then it caught, and then the room that had come for blood gave it up for something it had not felt in years and did not know it had missed. Lady Prudence Ashcombe stood in the wreck of her season with her fan hanging open. She was a proud woman, and the ton was watching, and the ton she had ruled for 20 years was now watching to see whether she could bend, because a new duchess had just been made on the gallery floor, and the first curtsy owed her would be the measure of everything after. Prudence knew it. That was the cruelty and the justice of it both. She had struck Adelaide's name in front of witnesses, and now she would have to unstrike it in front of the same, or be the woman too small to survive being wrong. She came across the floor. Every step of it cost her. She stopped before Adelaide, and she sank into a curtsy, shallow and correct, and strangled half to death, and she said through teeth, "Your Grace, the House of Ashcombe is honoured." 4 words of civility, and each one drawn like a tooth. Adelaide could have crushed her. The whole room waited to see her do it. She had earned it 100 times. "Thank you, Lady Prudence," she said instead, gently, and gave her nothing more to bleed over, because she had promised herself long ago she would never repeat a cruelty, not even a deserved one. And a woman who keeps that promise on the worst nights keeps it on the best ones too. Prudence rose, and something moved behind her hard eyes that might in a smaller woman have been the beginning of respect. Cassius signed at a writing table carried out for the purpose, under the magistrate's flat gaze and 90 pairs of eyes. The jointure release. 4 years of her own money, unfrozen with a scratch of a pen, he could not refuse. His hand shook. He did not look at her. When it was done, the magistrate took the paper, and Cassius stood, and found there was nowhere in that room for him to stand where someone was not looking at him, the way you look at a man who cheated a widow and got caught, and he left early, and no one marked his going except to be glad of it. Gideon Vaughan found her near the end of the evening, by the tall windows. "I came to lose gracefully," he said, "and there was rue in it, but no rancour. I see the field was never mine. He does you the one thing I couldn't, Lady Fenwick. He lets you be entirely yourself and calls it his good fortune. I'd have loved you smaller. You were right to send me off." He bowed over her hand, honest to the last. "Be happy, be sharp. God knows the world needs more of you, not less." "You're a good man, Mr. Vaughan," she said, and meant it. "The next woman you court, don't offer to let her put the wit down. Offer to keep up. You'll do better than you think." He laughed, and he went, the good suitor who never wins, and won something anyway in the going. And Cassandra Ashcombe, in the crush by the door, caught Adelaide's eye for one moment. Her mother's diamond, groomed for a coronet she'd never wanted, freed tonight from a duchess-shaped future she'd have worn like a yoke. She did not speak. She only let out a breath, and something in her shoulders came down for the first time in a season, and she gave Adelaide the smallest nod. Relief. Plain relief. One woman to another, across the length of a rule that had bound them both, and just now, at last, let go. 6 months on, Larkfield in spring. The morning room faced east and took the early light full, and it fell across a chessboard set on a low table between 2 chairs. A new set, ivory and ebony, complete and flawless, every piece perfect, commissioned from a craftsman in the town and given without a word one morning in place of a proposal already accepted. Adelaide sat with her tea and looked at it. The house was hers now, free and clear. The note paid, not by a duke's purse in the dark, but out of her own restored jointure, every pound of it her own, the way she had sworn it would be. Cassius had settled the last of the arrears under the magistrate's continued and unamused attention. Larkfield's deed sat in a drawer with her name on it, and no one else's. On the board, in the centre, on the square she liked to open from, she had set the old, chipped white queen. The new set had a queen of its own, of course, flawless ivory, unchipped, waiting in its place. She had taken it off and set it aside in a little dish, and she had put the broken one in its place instead. By choice. Not clutched in a pocket now, not carried like a wound she couldn't set down. Placed, freely, on the winning square, in the open, in the light, where anyone might see it and ask. Marcus came in with the post and saw where she'd set it, and understood, the way he'd learned to understand her, without needing it said. "You could have the perfect one," he said, sitting across from her, the light warm between them. "I had it made without a flaw on purpose." "I know you did." She turned the chipped queen a quarter turn on its square, the old gesture, but easy now, unhurried. But the perfect one never ruled anything. This one did. 20 years in the dark, and it still runs the board. She looked up at him. Too sharp to wed, they said. Twice, apparently. A dry glance at the memory of the whole watching world. "It seems the second one took." He laughed, the real one, the one that lived in the house again now, and had grown so common she sometimes forgot it had ever been rare. Between them, on the side table, sat a small stack of letters, tied once with faded ribbon, the ribbon now loose and set aside. His late wife's letters. 4 years he had kept them in a locked drawer, unopened, unable to read them and unable to be free of them. He had read them at last this spring. Adelaide had not asked him to. She had only made it a house where the drawer could be opened, and one evening he had opened it and read them through and wept once, quietly, and been done. She had never competed with the dead woman. That was the thing. She had not fought the ghost or resented the drawer. She had simply permitted it, made room for it, and by permitting it, she had let it be laid to rest, which fighting it never would have. The letters sat there now in the open, read and gentled, no longer a wound, and not yet a relic, just a life a good man had loved before this one, allowed its place on the table in the morning light. "Your move," he said. She looked at the board. She looked at the man across it, 38 and greying at the temples, and hers, by both meanings of the word he'd finally had the courage to say aloud. She looked at the broken queen, ruling its bright square in the eastern light, free, placed, unclutched. And she thought that the world had not softened her, not 1 degree. It had never managed to file down a single edge of her, and it never would. It had only, at long and stubborn last, learned to deserve her instead. She reached for a pawn and made the first move of the morning's game, and the two of them bent over the board in the spring light, two clever people who had run out of everything but each other, and never once, in all the years that followed, ran out of answers. Somewhere, in a Mayfair drawing room, the ton still called her sharp. It did. It always would. But now, when they said it the way you name a thing you wish you had. Comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far a sharp woman's story has travelled.